This is the border between New South Wales and Queensland. Welcome to a special edition of Paul Murray Live, where normally you'd be standing here and celebrating the fact that you've got a foot in each state. But you can't do that right now. In fact, there is a hard border between New South Wales and Queensland. Yes, this is Australia in 2020. 79 days ago, the Queensland Premier decided to close the state to anyone but Queenslanders. She wasn't alone. The same happened when it came to Tasmania, Western Australia, South Australia and the Northern Territory. All that time ago, we didn't know what was happening with the virus, but now we do know what's happening with the virus. We know that when today there was a fresh new case of coronavirus on the Gold Coast, it came from somebody who had flown in from overseas and was staying in a hotel. They weren't exposed to any member of the community whatsoever, yet still this remains. For the past 2 weeks, there has not been a case of coronavirus here in New South Wales in the community. It's all been in those hotel rooms. Yet every day that this border stays in place, and the ones around the country, 25 million Australians are not able to visit their own country and, even more importantly, bring their money with them. Because of borders like this, thousands of jobs have been lost and businesses are at risk to this very second. I wanted to come here tonight because it's not an issue to just talk about on television. I wanted to show you for real that right now in Australia, between one state and another, this sign exists. Now, this sign made sense when we didn't know what was happening with the virus. But this sign does not make sense now. This sign and all the others of all of the other states need to come down, and they need to come down on July the 1st. You see, that's 19 days from now. The virus takes 2 weeks to show its ugly head, and we will know whether those protesters let off a virus bomb or not this weekend, but next weekend. If the protests continue, then it'll be the weekend after that, and the weekend after that, and the weekend after that. But every day there is a delay. Businesses suffer. And this place right here is a place where hundreds of thousands of people cross the border for lots of different reasons. You might fly into the Gold Coast airport, you might turn right, and you might stay in a property in Coolangatta. But then you might want to go and play 10-pin bowling here in New South Wales. Under the current rules, you can't do that with your family. If you're from New South Wales and you'd like to go and get a coffee on the other side of the street, you can't do that. Why? Australia has done a great job with the virus. But the power-hungry provincial nonsense of premiers has to stop, and it has to stop now. We can reopen this country fully on July the 1st. Socially distanced, washed hands, all of that business. But hiding behind medical advice and bureaucrats, as opposed to listening to the people who are suffering, having sleepless night after sleepless night as a result of these decisions, is the wrong way to go about. Tonight on the show, you are going to meet the people who scream from their cars it's time to open the borders, or the businesses who desperately want it. Thankfully today, we started to get a little hint that sanity might be on its way. Previously, Anastasia Palaszczuk said that she was going to open this border in September. She's now talking about July.
There is no difference from what the Prime Minister has said and what I've said. I've said very clearly that in stage 3, we are looking at what interstate travel can be allowed. We are at 1 on this in terms of July. So there is no dissent on this. He has said July, I have said July. We will let Queenslanders know where they can travel interstate and where interstate people can travel to Queensland.
Thankfully, the Prime Minister agrees July 1 is when we can do this.
It is very important that we open up the domestic borders in this country, Mr Speaker. We need to get planes flying around Australia. And if you want to see planes flying around Australia, Mr Speaker, we need to open up these domestic borders. Mr Speaker, that will lead, and I agree, that it occurs for South Australia, for Tasmania, for Queensland and Western Australia. This isn't a partisan issue.
But wherever you are listening, whatever political stripe you are, I drove through the night and drove all day to stand right here to meet the people you will meet tonight, the people who need the borders to open.
Absolutely appalling. We live in New South Wales and all of our medical appointments are in Queensland.
We do have business across the road in Queensland, so yeah, it's a bit of a pain. It's an absolute joke. Absolute joke.
I think it's just completely unfair. The businesses are on those streets, there's no parking, and it's just ridiculous.
We can't keep the border closed for too much longer because it's going to mean that we're all hurting more than we need to. If those tourists aren't allowed to come to Queensland, that's $3.7 billion that we've got to find to replace it.
Julia Bradley is our South East Queensland reporter, and she tells us about what's happening on the other side of this damn border.
Adrian Wright has been operating his fish and chip shop in Tweed Heads for 12 years. In 2016, he decided to also try his luck in Coolangatta. But for an area so reliant on interstate visitors, the border shutdown has proved to be a harsh reality. How has that Coolangatta business been faring during this period of restrictions on the border?
Well, we've closed it because purely it's not worth opening. You know, there's not enough customers, there's not enough trade. We solely survive on the tourist industry. 75% of our business is tourists in all the apartments and 25% locals. And that's not enough to maintain that business around at this moment in time.
And it is a very tourist-reliant area, as is, you know, our Surfers Paradise and Broadbeach. We've got very different restrictions in Queensland, whereas it does seem like people in New South Wales are a bit more free to travel around now. What do you think needs to be done to see that relief for businesses in Queensland?
Oh, that's a really tough question because I sit on both sides of the fence. You know, I understand why the government are doing it, and I also understand the impact it has on businesses because I'm in the middle. I have a business that I can't open and this other business here at Tweed which obviously struggles. But it's got to be sort of fair for both sides. If the government still feel that it's necessary to keep us with borders, then I have to respect that. I'm more concerned about the long-term recovery when the borders are open, of getting people back to these areas.
And you've poured a lot of money, I imagine, into that Coolangatta store. High hopes for it to be around for a while and build up that customer base that the store here in Tweed Heads does have. Are you hopeful that it will be able to reopen?
I'm hopeful, but not very pessimistic about it because of the return of the tourist. You know, we need international, we need the domestic market to come to Coolangatta, to come to the Gold Coast. And I think that's a long way off. So getting back to where I was before COVID-19, I see it being a couple of years, you know, for Coolangatta and also for here. It's just this is the strongest store at the moment that can survive because I have more locals. Where Coolangatta doesn't have as many locals, we have tourists.
Other border businesses are simply trying to stay financially viable after more than 3 months of lockdown.
About 40% of our clientele comes from the other side of the border in Tweed Heads. So, you know, that's a big chunk of the business that we have for our local clientele that come day in, day out. So I'd like to see the border open up pretty quick. A lot of them we haven't seen, and they're missed because this is part of their daily routine of what they do. And it's missed not only on our bottom line as a dollars for the business, but it's their general livelihood as well. It's their lifestyle. And that's been taken from them for the present time.
We had to lay our casuals off, so there's only been a couple of full-timers on at the minute, just trying to make ends meet.
Queensland's enforced border closure is costing the state an estimated $1.5 million a month. That's on top of the almost $2 billion monthly loss to the tourism industry.
There seems to be a lot of people that get paid for standing around sitting on a border, waving cars through or doing whatever they're doing. That's a lot of money spent from our side, not the New South Wales side.
Businesses on the Tweed across the border in New South Wales have had a head start. They're beginning to bounce back thanks largely to their Queensland counterparts.
There's clearly been some pent-up demand. There was people waiting at the doors on day one, and there's been solid performance since those, even given that we've got limited numbers.
We've just come down for a cup of coffee today.
We can have coffee here.
We're members here, and it's nice to see the club back open again.
Queensland operators may face a loss of tourism over their peak season, the popular winter school holidays. They're begging the state government to commit to a date to reopen borders.